When you walk into an Apple store today and see the latest iPhone priced at nearly $1,000, you might wonder why smartphones have become so expensive over the past decade. The price progression tells a striking story. The iPhone 7 launched at $699 in 2016. By 2018, the iPhone XS reached $849. Today's iPhone 15 Pro starts at $999. This dramatic price increase becomes even more apparent when we examine the historical data. Over the past decade, iPhone prices have risen by more than 40%, far outpacing general inflation. Most consumers assume this price increase is simply due to Apple's profit margins, advanced technology costs, or supply chain shortages. However, there's a hidden factor that significantly impacts what you pay at the checkout. This hidden factor is tariffs, taxes imposed on imported goods that are quietly embedded in the final price you pay. When governments impose tariffs on smartphones and their components, these costs don't disappear. They get passed directly to consumers. Most consumers have never heard the word tariff, yet they pay these taxes every time they purchase imported electronics, clothing, or countless other products. Understanding how tariffs work is crucial to understanding why many everyday items cost more than they should. In this comprehensive analysis, we'll uncover exactly how tariffs work, who really pays for them, and why your next iPhone purchase might cost significantly more than you expect. The economics of international trade directly impact your wallet in ways you've never considered. To understand how tariffs affect the prices of products like iPhones, we first need to understand exactly what a tariff is and how it works in international trade. Imagine a cargo ship loaded with smartphones manufactured in China. This ship is about to embark on a journey across the Pacific Ocean to deliver these phones to distributors in the United States. As the ship approaches the United States border, it must pass through customs. This is where tariffs come into play. At the customs checkpoint, the ship encounters a barrier. This represents the point where tariffs are applied to imported goods. Now let's define exactly what a tariff is. A tariff is a tax imposed by a government on goods imported from another country. It's crucial to understand who actually pays this tax. The tariff is paid by the company importing the goods, not by the foreign government or manufacturer. Let's look at a concrete example. When a European phone distributor imports smartphones from China, they must pay the tariff to their own government when the goods arrive at the European border. The process is straightforward. Goods cross the border. Customs officials assess the tariff based on the value or quantity of goods, and the importing company pays the tax before the goods can enter the country. This fundamental understanding of tariffs as taxes paid by importing companies, not foreign governments, is essential for grasping how tariffs ultimately affect consumer prices and international trade dynamics. Understanding the different types of tariffs is crucial for grasping how international trade policies affect consumer prices. There are two primary categories of tariffs that governments use to regulate imports. Ad valorem tariffs are calculated as a percentage of the imported product's value. For example, a 10% ad valorem tariff means the tax equals 10% of the product's selling price. Specific tariffs, on the other hand, are fixed fees charged per unit of the imported good, regardless of the product's value. A $100 specific tariff means exactly $100 per item. To illustrate the difference more clearly, consider how these tariffs would affect products of different values. An ad valorem tariff adjusts with the product's price, while a specific tariff remains constant. Notice how the ad valorem tariff increases with the product's value, while the specific tariff remains the same regardless of price. This creates different economic incentives and impacts on trade. Governments also use compound tariffs, which combine both ad valorem and specific components. This creates a more complex tariff structure that provides both a minimum tax floor and proportional scaling. Now let's examine the official definitions and see how these tariff types are formally classified in international trade policy. These different tariff structures give governments flexibility in their trade policy. Ad valorem tariffs provide proportional protection that scales with product value, while specific tariffs offer predictable revenue regardless of market fluctuations. Understanding these mechanisms is essential for analyzing how trade policies ultimately affect consumer prices and international commerce. A common misconception about tariffs is that foreign countries pay them. In reality, the burden of tariffs flows through the entire supply chain and ultimately lands on the consumer. Let's trace this journey step by step. When a tariff is imposed, the importer, the company bringing goods into the country, must pay this tax at the border. Let's say a tariff adds $100 to the cost of importing a product. However, importers don't absorb this cost. They're businesses that need to maintain their profit margins, so they pass this tariff cost on to wholesalers. The wholesaler now pays $110, the original tariff, plus the importer's markup. The wholesaler, in turn, cannot afford to absorb this increased cost either. They add their own markup and pass the cost to retailers. The retailer now pays $125, significantly more than the original tariff amount. Finally, retailers must also maintain their profit margins and cover their operating costs. They add their markup and pass the final cost to consumers. What started as a $100 tariff has now become a $140 price increase for the consumer. This demonstrates a crucial economic principle. Each participant in the supply chain adds their markup to cover costs and maintain profitability. A $100 tariff becomes a 40% price increase by the time it reaches consumers. The key insight is that tariffs function as a regressive tax on consumers. While governments collect tariff revenue from importers, the economic burden ultimately falls on everyday shoppers who pay higher prices for goods. This is why economists emphasize that tariffs are fundamentally a tax on consumers, not on foreign countries. Understanding this cost flow is essential for grasping the true impact of trade policy. When tariffs increase, it's consumers who bear the financial burden through higher prices at stores, not the foreign producers or governments that tariffs are supposedly targeting. The US-China trade war that began in 2018 provides the perfect real-world example of how tariffs actually work in practice and who really bears the cost. The trade war unfolded over several years, starting with the first wave of tariffs in 2018, escalating throughout 2019, and reaching peak impact by 2020. The scale of this trade war was unprecedented. Between 2018 and 2020, the United States imposed tariffs on over $350 billion worth of Chinese imports. These tariffs targeted a wide range of products, including electronics, furniture, steel, and toys. Let's visualize the major categories that were affected. China didn't sit idle. They retaliated with their own tariffs on American goods, leading to what became known as the biggest trade war of the 21st century. But here's the crucial point. U.S. consumers ended up paying billions more at stores. Studies consistently showed that almost all of the tariff costs were passed directly on to American shoppers. According to the Yale Budget Lab, the price level from all 2025 tariffs rises by 2.3% in the short run. This translates to an average per household consumer loss of $3,800 in 2024. We saw real price spikes in everyday products. Washing machines, electronics, and toys all became significantly more expensive as retailers passed tariff costs directly to consumers. The US-China trade war demonstrates a fundamental truth about tariffs. They are ultimately a tax on consumers. Despite political rhetoric about making other countries pay, American families bore the real costs through higher prices at checkout. Smartphones represent one of the most complex global supply chains in modern manufacturing. To understand how tariffs impact iPhone prices, we need to examine the intricate network of components and assembly processes that span multiple continents. An iPhone contains components sourced from dozens of countries worldwide. The display comes from South Korea or Japan, the processor from Taiwan or the USA, memory from South Korea, cameras from Japan or Germany, and batteries from China or Japan. However, final assembly predominantly occurs in China. Components from these various countries flow into China for final assembly. This centralized assembly model has made China the world's largest smartphone manufacturing hub, but it also creates a critical vulnerability when tariffs are applied. The cost structure of iPhones has evolved significantly since 2008. While early models had simpler component breakdowns, modern iPhones contain increasingly sophisticated and expensive components. Core electronics, displays, and cameras now represent the largest cost categories, making the entire device more susceptible to tariff impacts. When tariffs are applied to Chinese electronics, they affect the entire assembled iPhone, not just individual components. Current analyst predictions suggest that iPhone prices in the US could rise by 30 to 40% due to tariffs on Chinese imports. This could add $200 to $400 to base models, with the most expensive iPhone Pro Max potentially reaching close to $2,300. The 2025 tariff policies are creating significant price pressures across the smartphone market. Even if Apple absorbs some costs to maintain competitiveness, retailers and carriers may still pass increased costs to consumers. This supply chain disruption affects global pricing patterns, not just direct import markets. While iPhone prices have increased historically due to advanced features and premium positioning, tariff-driven price increases are fundamentally different. Unlike previous increases that provided additional consumer value through better technology, tariff increases represent pure cost burden transfers with no corresponding benefit to consumers. This makes the current supply chain vulnerability particularly concerning for both manufacturers and consumers. Tariffs represent one of the most complex and controversial tools in international trade policy. Like a double-edged sword, they can both protect and harm, depending on perspective and implementation. To understand tariffs fully, we must examine both sides of this economic tool. On one side, tariffs can provide significant benefits to domestic industries and workers. Tariffs protect domestic jobs by making foreign competitors more expensive. They level the playing field when foreign governments subsidize their exports. They generate revenue for the government and can protect industries critical to national security. However, the other edge of the sword cuts consumers and the broader economy. Tariffs typically lead to higher prices, reduced choices, and can trigger damaging trade wars. The complexity of tariffs becomes clear when we examine real trade data. The relationship between major trading partners involves billions of dollars and millions of jobs. The trade relationship between major economies like the United States and China illustrates how tariffs can escalate into full-scale trade conflicts, affecting global supply chains and consumer prices worldwide. From an economic perspective, tariffs create deadweight losses and market distortions. They shift the balance between consumer and producer surplus, often reducing overall economic efficiency. The effectiveness of tariffs depends heavily on context. The specific product, the countries involved, the existing trade relationships, and the strategic goals all determine whether tariffs help or harm. Looking forward, the global economy could benefit significantly if countries move away from protectionist policies and toward new multilateral trade agreements that reduce barriers while addressing legitimate concerns about fair competition. Tariffs remain a double-edged sword in international trade. While they can protect domestic industries and workers in the short term, they often impose costs on consumers and can lead to inefficient resource allocation. The key is finding the right balance and using them strategically rather than as blunt instruments of economic policy.